Morning, everybody. I am Brett L. Pape. That is Coach Bruce. And this is the Coach Approach. Coach, how you doing this morning?
Doing good, man. Rocking my Boise State Broncos hat this morning in the hopes that somehow Ashton Jonty falls to my Dallas Cowboys in the 2025 NFL Draft. I'm putting it out there in the universe.
Well, there you go, Coach. I'm sure you woke up this morning knowing at least you're not going to have to go through a Dallas loss today. So I'm sure you're having a great morning then.
We can't lose this weekend. I know that. That's a fact. Put
There
money
you
on
go. Hey, let's jump right into it. First with the bye weeks. We got only 2 byes this week. We kind of mentioned Dallas Cowboys. They're out, as is the Chicago Bears. They're on bye. Both teams out for this week. Before we get started, please hit the subscribe and the like button so our friends over at Yards Per can get whatever they get from that stuff. But let's jump right into the games, and we got some good ones, especially in the early morning slate. The Detroit Lions, 4-1 at the Minnesota Vikings, 5-0. My pick, I've got the Lions winning 24, Vikings 17. Who do you like in this one, Coach?
Yeah, I got Lions 27, Vikings 24. I just feel like the Lions right now are playing very, very well on both sides of the ball, and they're owning the trenches. Even with Aiden Hutchinson out, I like the Lions' chance to go into Minnesota and steal a win.
That's going to be a big loss, though, for Detroit. I don't think that's
Huge.
been mentioned. They kind of struggle up front as it is as far as rushing the passer. When you take him out, now you're really taking their only guy that they have for that role. But we'll see how it looks today. Let's get right into the Detroit starting sits. Detroit's offense, first in scoring, fourth in rushing yards, fourth in passing yards. Minnesota defense, fourth in points allowed, second in rushing yards allowed, 27th in passing yards. Who do you want to start in this one for Detroit, Coach?
Yeah, so let's start with Jared Goff. His QB 16 this week and QB 20 on the season. Over his last 2 games, he's finished with more than 25 fantasy points, which is good enough for the QB4 overall. He's got 7 touchdown passes, just 1 interception over the last 3 games. Now those are wins over Dallas, Seattle, and Arizona. Take that for what it's worth. But this is a different defense. The Vikings give up the 9th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks, and only Jordan Love has finished as a top 13 quarterback against this defense. So for Jared Goff and Superflex, I'm okay with you playing him 1 quarterback leagues. He's not in my lineup this week. Jahmyr Gibbs. We were talking about this before the show, but it's funny. Every week, the consensus rankings have Jahmyr Gibbs ranked above David Montgomery. But even in PPR formats, Jahmyr Gibbs is the RB13, Montgomery's the RB10. So, but the consensus keeps wanting to put it the other way around. But for Jahmyr Gibbs, he's a start for me. He scored 16 or more PPR points in 4 to 5 games played and has been in double digits in every game. He's had 70 or more scrimmage yards and 14 or more touches in every game this season, while averaging 90 total yards from scrimmage. So he's a start for me. David Montgomery, he's also scored 15 or more fantasy points and at least 1 touchdown in every game this season. He's averaging 17 touches and 89 scrimmage yards with 6 rushing touchdowns. So he's a start for me. Then Amon St. Brown, he's wide receiver 2 this week. I think that might be a little bit high. Those are consensus rankings. He's wide receiver 12 in fantasy points per game and has scored 20 more points in 3 of the last 4. He's had a receiving touchdown in 3 straight games, and Minnesota gives up the 2nd most fantasy points to slot receivers. So Amon St. Brown is in my lineup. Jameson Williams is interesting. He's wide receiver 28 on the season or for this week, wide receiver 18 in fantasy points per game in PPR formats. He's scored at least 16 points and had a touchdown in each of the last 2 games. But after netting 20 targets in the first 2 games of the season, he's averaging just 3 targets and 2 grabs over the last 3 games. So for me, the volume just isn't there. So he's not a must start for me, but I understand if you want to play him based on your lineups. And then Sam Laporta, he had his first double-digit game last week in PPR formats. He caught his only target against my Cowboys for 52 yards and a touchdown, but otherwise he's had 2 or less receptions in 3 out of 5 games. And no games with more than 4 and has not broken 55 yards in a game this year. The Vikings, though, however, give up the 7th most fantasy points per game to tight end, so it is a good matchup for Sam Laporta. I think the talent is too much to not put him in your lineups. I feel like I'm okay putting him in your lineups this week.
Let's move on to the Minnesota starting sit. The tight ends have been tough all year, everywhere. Yeah. I mean, you talk about Sam Laporta and what his struggles so far, but Tight end 6 on the week. You draft him high, you kind of have to play him. But let's move over to the other side of the ball. Minnesota's starting to sit. Quarterback 7, Sam Darnold on the week. He's quarterback 15 on the season. He's 6th in yards per attempt. I like him today. Start Sam Darnold. Running back Aaron Jones. Questionable coming into the week with what was said a hip injury. Turns out it was more of a hamstring issue. Faces a tough Detroit that is allowed the lowest yards per game to running backs. So he's a tough start for me. I'm sitting everybody actually for Minnesota other than Justin Jefferson. He's a must-start wide receiver, 1 on the week. If you looked at or if you watched any of the pregame stuff for the Jacksonville game today, they talked about how Justin Jefferson's 3 of his 4 biggest games in his career have come against Detroit. So he's a start. Jordan Addison, he's a sit for me. He's wide receiver 33 on the season. Lions have given up the 8th fewest points, PPR points, to receivers on the year. So he's a sit. And then Johnny Mutt, he's obviously a sit as well. Anything you would change there, Coach?
No, and it's funny because you talk about Jordan Addison. Now I'm forced to play him in Scott Fishbowl this week, but I'm with you. He's not a must start for me either.
Let's move on. Tennessee. Actually, let's not. Let's get to our first couple questions. We got RP10. Thank you so much for tuning in. Really appreciate it. Would you trade Devontae Smith and Kareem Hunt for DK? I already have London, Jamar, Pollard, B-Rob Jr. as my main starters. I don't know, Coach. Would you make that deal? I realize
I would not.
Yeah.
I would not. I get
like
the desire to want
to the rest of the year. I don't know when we'll see Pacheco. I don't think there's that big of enough drop off between DK and Devontae to make that deal.
Yeah, and I think stacks are great, but I don't know if you want to force a stack just because you have Geno Smith. I'd rather have 2 starters versus 1 in that situation.
And then let's get to A down at the bottom, PPR. You like Zach Moss or Tyrone Tracy? You've seen You've seen Brown kind of take over, Chase Brown kind of take over the last couple weeks. Tyrone looked great the last couple weeks, but but Devin Singletary is expected to be back. Of those 2, who are you going with, Coach? That's kind of a tough one.
I still like Tyrone Tracy. I think that in Cincinnati, if you look at the advanced metrics, Chase Brown's been more explosive than Zach Moss. It's not really that close. And same thing with Tyrone Tracy versus Devin Singletary in terms of missed tackles forced and yards after contact. So I like Tyrone Tracy this week, even with Devin Singletary back.
And then let's get down here at the bottom with with Blake. Thanks always again, Blake, for tuning in. Does he start Herbert, Goff, or Stafford this week? Of those 3, it would come down. I'm not starting Herbert. Come down to Goff or Stafford, and I'm going with Goff.
Yeah, I think we'll get in the Chargers game, but there's such low passing volume there with the Chargers. Herbert's only had 1 game over 200 yards passing, so he's out. And then, of course, between Goff and Stafford, Cooper Kupp is still not back yet, so I'm going to go Goff there.
No Cooper Kupp this week? Was that?
I thought I heard that this morning. I should double check that as soon as I said that out loud, but I have not had a chance to look this morning at that one. I did not have the Rams breakdown this week.
All right, we'll have a look at that. We'll know that before we get to that one. Bills 31. Let's move on to our next game. Sorry, Tennessee Titans 1-4 at the Buffalo Bills. My pick: Bills 31, Tennessee 13. Who do you like in this one, Coach?
Yeah, I've got Bills 24, Tennessee Titans 13.
Okay, Tennessee. So Blake right now just says that Kupp is out. So with Kupp out, it makes makes Goff even more of the play.
Yep.
All right, let's get into Tennessee's start and sit. Tennessee's offense, number 22 in points scored, number 15 in rushing yards, number 31 in passing yards. Face the Buffalo defense, that's 11th in points allowed, 22nd in rushing yards allowed, and 15th in passing yards allowed. Who do you want to start for Tennessee, if anyone, this week, Coach?
Yeah, my only start this week for Tennessee would be Tony Pollard. He's RB10 this week. He's RB19 on the season, averaging over 18 fantasy points per game over the last 2 games. And with Tajay Spears definitely out now with hamstring injury, TP is getting all the touches, so I'm confident starting him. I'm not starting. Obviously, Will Levis is out with the AC joint that came out yesterday. They're going to go with Mason Rudolph. His only action this season against the Miami Dolphins, completed 9 of 17 passes for 85 yards and not threw a touchdown or interception. Obviously, I'm not starting Mason Rudolph, and I'm not starting DeAndre Hopkins or Calvin Ridley. We can go through the numbers. They're gross. So just with Mason Rudolph in there, I'm not confident starting either one of those guys. Means I'm also not starting Chiga Conko at tight end.
Okay, let's go to the other side of the ball. Buffalo's offense, 6th in points scored, 12th in rushing yards, 25th in passing yards. Tennessee's defense, 13th in points allowed, 10th in rushing yards allowed, and 1st in passing yards allowed. Josh Allen, quarterback 4 on the week. He's a must start. James Cook is back this week, so he's a must start for me as well. Ray Davis, he's not a start. Obviously, if you had him last week and you played him, last week was the week to play him, as he did perform well, and Cook's absence, but Ray Davis does have a slight calf issue, so he's a sit for me. And then everyone other than Dalton Kincaid. I have Dalton Kincaid, tight end 8 on the week, must start. But all the other pass catchers, I'm not comfortable playing them. Cooper, first game of Buffalo, kind of a wait-and-see approach, and you just aren't getting enough from Khalil or Keon Coleman week in and week out for me to feel comfortable put them in the lineup. Anything you would change there, Coach?
No, I think you hit it with Mari Cooper. I'm not confident putting him in my lineup either. It's his first game there. It is a different offense. It's not like it's a scheme he's familiar with or he's come from or played in. So I'm not real confident starting him there either.
Okay, moving on. Miami Dolphins 2-3 at the Indianapolis Colts 3-3. I got the Colts winning this one, Coach, 24-13. What says you?
Yeah, I got Colts winning 23-20. I think it's a little bit closer than that, but I just got the Colts winning.
Miami offense, 32nd in points scored, 18th in rushing yards, 26th in passing yards. Tua is a little bit better than what people kind of gave him credit for in the past.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As far as starts and sits for Miami, I've got Tyler Huntley. I've got him as a start this week. I think he's in 2 starts this season. He's finished as a QB 25 and QB 19. He's completed 60% of his passes for 290 yards, does not have a touchdown pass, but does have 1 interception. But the Colts give up the 10th most fantasy points to quarterbacks, and 5 out of 6 quarterbacks have finished as a top 17 play. So in super flex formats, I'm not opposed to playing Tyler Huntley. Obviously, 1 quarterback leagues, you should have better options than Huntley. And then Devon Achane, he's returning the lineup from the concussion he got back in week 5. He was the RB2 in PPR scoring after the first 2 games this season, but in his last 2 games, he's failed to hit double digits. But those are also without Tua Tagovailoa. They could not get the passing game going. So Devon Achane is a start for me. And they've allowed 4 running backs to rush more than 90 yards in a game. So I have confidence there. Raheem Mostert, his advanced metrics are not great. It's been limited action this year. To me, it's Devon Achane over Raheem Mostert. So I'm not starting Raheem Mostert. Jalen Waddle, 4 consecutive games with 4 grabs and less than 50 yards receiving. I'm still out on Jalen Waddle. I am in on Tyreek Hill, and I've not been up to this point, but I do think the matchup favors Tyler Huntley being a little bit more aggressive in the passing game. What's crazy is Tyreek Hill, wide receiver 51 and wide receiver 31 in fantasy scoring with Tyler Huntley. He did have his best game last week with 6 grabs on 10 targets for 69 yards. I think he finds the end zone this week, and I think he's a play.
Let's move on to the other side, Indianapolis. Indianapolis offense, 16th in scoring, 17th in rushing yards, 15th in passing yards. Miami defense, 17th in scoring or points allowed, 18th in rushing yards allowed, and 3rd in passing yards allowed. Quarterback, 15 on the week, Anthony Richardson. He is back. I have him a start in Superflex. I'm not quite ready to play him in 1 quarterback leagues. Feel like there's got to be 12 better options. Until we see a little more consistency in him, it's hard for me to play him. He has a quarterback 4 finish, a quarterback 21 finish, and a quarterback 31 finish in his 3 starts this season. It's kind of that volatility is a little bit tough for me to go with week in and week out. So he's a sit for me. Running back Jonathan Taylor is out, so brings you to Tyler Goodson and or Trey Sermon. There's sits. Michael Pittman's a sit for me. Josh Downs is the only guy that I feel comfortable starting. He's wide receiver 16 this year, has a 26.3 target share. So Josh Downs really is the only guy I feel comfortable starting. Maybe Anthony Richardson and Superflex. Anything you would change there, Coach?
I'm going to say sneaky play Tyler Goodson. I've got him as an anytime touchdown this week. I think he finds the end zone, but it's a sneaky play. But he's probably not in your lineup, so there's not enough volume there.
Okay, let's go to Cam's question real quick. Wide receiver question. He says Brandon Ayuk or Shakir PPR. I know we haven't seen much. We did see kind of a blow up game from Ayuk, or at least better last week. So it is Ayuk for me, Coach.
Yeah, it's Ayuk for me. He's in, I think, as a wide receiver 2 play this week, whereas I've got Khalil Shakir more in the wide receiver 3 flex. So I like
Jared
Ayuk as well.
Jared Nelson, Downs or Eckler, half PPR. Brian Robinson is expected to be back this week. So for that reason only, it's Downs for me.
Yep, you nailed it. It's Downs for me with Brian Robinson back.
All right, let's move on to our next game. Seattle Seahawks 3-3 at the Atlanta Falcons 4-2. I've got Atlanta winning 34, Seahawks 27. Who do you have in this one?
Yeah, I got Seahawks 26 going on the road and stealing one in Atlanta, and Atlanta Falcons 22.
Okay, let's go. Seattle starting sits. Seattle's offense 13th in scoring, 29th in rushing yards, and first in passing yards. The Atlanta defense 15th in points allowed, 24th in rushing yards allowed, 9th in passing yards allowed. Who are we starting for Seattle, Coach?
Yeah, so Geno Smith, talk about quarterbacks. He's had 13 or more fantasy points in every game. He gives you a safe floor. He's had 4 games with 40 or more pass attempts and 2 games with more than 50. They are slinging it. Leads the league in attempts, completions, yards. So I feel comfortable starting Geno Smith. And then Kenneth Walker, he's RB3 in fantasy points per game on the season. He did have an illness as of last night. I think he is looking to play. He scored 18 or more points in 3 out of 4 games. He's been heavily involved in the passing game, which was a knock on him coming out. So I like Kenneth Walker this week. Zach Charbonnet, if Kenneth Walker does not play due to the illness, then I think you have to play Charbonnet based on the volume play alone. Other than that, he's not in my lineup. DK Metcalf, wide receiver 15 on the season. He's had 3 games with less than 8 fantasy points. But from weeks 2 through 4, he was the wide receiver 3 at 21.6 fantasy points per game. I love the volume. He's getting 9 targets, 5.1 grabs, and 78 yards a game. Falcons have given up 8 receiving touchdowns. AJ Terrell, ironically, he's 82nd in catch rate, 78th in passer rating, and 77th in man success rate. I like the matchup for DK Metcalf. And then Jackson Smith and Jigba, he's been wide receiver 34 in fantasy points per game and only 11.6 per game. He has scored less than 7 fantasy points in 2 of the first 3 games. He has had 3 straight in double digits. The volume isn't the problem at 8 targets a game, 5.7 grabs a game. It's the yards and his inability to find the end zone. But this week, again, high passing volume. Don't mind him as a wide receiver 3 flex play. And then same with Tyler Lockett. He's wide receiver 30 on the season. So the 2 of those guys are kind of in the same spot. If I had to choose one over the other, I'm probably going JSN over Lockett based on what I've seen this year, but just from target volume. And then Noah Fant, tied in 19 fantasy points per game on the season. Just 2 games with more than 5.5 fantasy points and 25 plus receiving yards. So I'm out on Noah Fant. But with the tight ends and how that scoring has gone this week, you may be forced to have to play Noah Fant, but hopefully you've got a better option.
Atlanta's starting to sit. Atlanta's offense 11th in scoring, 22nd in rushing yards, 6th in passing yards. Seattle defense 24th in points allowed, 26th in rushing yards allowed, 10th in passing yards allowed. Let's go to our must starts first for Atlanta. Must start for me, Bijan Robinson. We see Seattle's defense is one of the worst against the rushing attack. So I love Bijan this week. Drake London, wide receiver 7 on the week, another must start. Along with Kyle Pitts, we're finally starting to see some increase in volume over the last few weeks. So those are my must starts: Robinson, London, Pitts. And Superflex, I feel comfortable playing Kirk Cousins. Seattle has allowed the highest yards per attempt to quarterbacks the last 3 weeks. So I like Kirk Cousins. And Darnell Mooney, wide receiver 24 on the week. That puts you in wide receiver 2 territory. So I like Mooney this week as well. Anything you would change there, Coach?
Nope, I like it.
All right, we've got a question from Uzi and Daboof. Okay, Coach, I like that name.
Yeah.
Okay. Darnold or Stroud this week? For me, it's Darnold. How about you, Coach?
Yeah, I've got Darnold too. He's at QB6 this week in the matchup. It's a good matchup for him. And then Stroud is QB12 this week. So I've got Darnold ahead of Stroud.
Okay, how about this one, Coach? We've got Tyreek Hill or Chase Brown at the flex. I know you talked about you like Hill this week. You see Hill getting in the end zone. I like Chase Brown, and I like his matchup this week. It's Brown for me. What about for you?
Hey, look, if it's a PPR format, I like Chase Brown too. I think he gets involved in the passing game there, so I don't have a problem playing Chase Brown over Tyreek Hill. Again, picking Tyreek Hill to get in the end zone versus picking Tyreek Hill to have 10 grabs for 150 yards is a little bit different, but I like the volume play at the running back position with Chase Brown.
Here we go. Let's move on to our next game, and this is a game I'm obviously pretty interested in. That's the Houston Texans 5-1 at my Green Bay Packers 4-2. My pick. I got the Packers winning 24-21. Who do you have in this one, Coach?
Yeah, I've got Packers 34, Texans 27. I think it's a higher scoring game. I think the offense is getting rhythm, and I just think Green Bay's got more there overall in terms of the run game to dominate.
Here we go. Houston's offense, 14th in scoring, 14th in rushing yards, 5th in passing yards, facing a Green Bay defense that is 9th in points allowed, 8th in rushing yards allowed, 25th in passing yards allowed. Houston starting sits. Who are they for you, Coach?
So CJ Stroud, we got a core QB 11 this week. He's got 6 touchdown passes over the last 3 games. He's got 10 touchdowns and 4 interceptions on the season, completing over 68% of his passes. Packers are 27th in passing yards allowed and giving up 10 touchdown passes to quarterbacks. They have intercepted the ball 9 times, but I do like CJ Stroud this week as a start. Joe Mixon, RB5 in fantasy points per game at 20.7. In his full 2 games played, he's finished as the RB2 overall in both games. 310 scrimmage yards and 3 touchdowns in those 2 games. So he's a must start for me. And then Stephon Diggs, without Nico Collins, he's finished with 18 points or more in 4 out of 6 games played. Had 5 or more receptions in 5 out of 6 and 69 or more yards in 4 out of 6 games. He's a must start for me. And then Tank Dell, wide receiver 55 in fantasy points per game, which just has not been there. But last week without Nico, he did have 7 grabs on 9 targets for 47 yards and found the end zone, finished at wide receiver 16. Saw a season high in route rate at 91%, targets per route run at 28%, and target share at 31%. So he's a low-end wide receiver 2 play for me this week. So Tank Dell's probably in your lineups. Dalton Schultz, tight end 27 in PPR this season, averaging just 5.4 fantasy points per game. Has not scored in double digits since week 1. Yet to break 40 yards or score a touchdown in a game. But he did see season high 8 targets last week, so that's encouraging with Nico out. And the Packers do give up the 3rd most fantasy points to tight end, so I do like Dalton Schultz this week.
Green Bay starting sit. Green Bay's offense, 7th in scoring, 2nd in rushing yards, 10th in passing yards. Houston's defense, 15th in points allowed, 14th in rushing yards allowed, and 4th in passing yards allowed. Quarterback 5 on the week, Jordan Love. He's a must start for me. He's 2 games over the last 3 weeks with 4 or more touchdown passes. Running back 13 on the week, Josh Jacobs. He's a start, but he's only running back 24 on the season, despite the fact that he's getting great volume week in and week out. He's averaging 19.8 touches and 94 yards a game. Wide receiver 12 on the week, Jaden Reed. I have him as a must start. Here's where it gets a little difficult with Green Bay, because last week you get Jaden Reed who gets in the end zone. You get Romeo Doubs who got in the end zone twice, and you had Christian Watson who got in the end zone. So they're all possible starts for you, especially at the flex spot. But I got Jaden Reed as a must start. Romeo Doubs is a flex start. He was wide receiver 11 on the week last week. Christian Watson I have as a flex start. But again, it's kind of up in the air on who's going to get fed. But against this defense, and according to you, we're going to have a high-scoring game, so I can see a reason to play any of those pass catchers. Takes us to tight end. Tight end number 9 on the week, Tucker Kraft. He's a start for me. He's tight end 6 on the season. Anything you would change in any of that, Coach?
No, I mean, it's tough, right? With Green Bay, I love the way they can. We love the passing game. I think we've talked about Matt LaFleur as a play caller, but Jaden Reed, Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson, those guys are probably all in. Dontavian Wicks, to me, is the only guy that's probably the odd man out, but we both like Dontavian Wicks. So would not be surprised to see him play well this week.
Well, we don't know if he's going to play. That's why I didn't mention he suffered an injury last week, left
I saw
in the
that.
first half. So we'll see. It's kind of a game time decision. That decision should be made pretty soon if it already hasn't been made. Let's move on to our next game. Cincinnati Bengals, 2-4 at the Cleveland Browns, 1-5. I got the Bengals winning 27-13, Coach. Who do you have that win in this one?
Yeah, I got Bengals 29, Cleveland Browns 20, which means I probably have the Browns scoring more points than I should. But
there you go. Cincinnati starting sit. Cincinnati's offense, 9th in scoring, 26th in rushing yards, 7th in passing yards. Cleveland's defense, 19th in points allowed, 20th in rushing yards allowed, 11th in passing yards allowed. Who are we starting for Cincinnati?
I'm definitely starting Joe Burrow. We've got him at QB6 this week. He's been the QB2 since week 2. We know he had a rough game in week 1 this season, but he's got 5 straight games over 17 fantasy points and scored more than 19 in 3 of the last 4. He's got 12 touchdown passes, just 2 interceptions while completing over 67% of his passes. He's averaging 283 yards a game over the last 5 games. Look, people, I've heard it this year. I can't remember what show I was listening to, but he's 1-5 against the Browns, who've only given up 6 touchdown passes this season. This is not the same Browns defense to me as what we saw last year. I do think there's an opportunity there. A fully healthy T. Higgins, a fully healthy Jamar Chase, what they do with Chase Brown. I just think that there's too much that Cincinnati has in the offense. So Chase Brown, we talked about him. There's a new RB1 in Cincinnati. He's been the RB6 in PPR scoring over the last 3 games. He has 3 rushing touchdowns and a receiving touchdown in those games. And most importantly, he appears to be the lead back in Cincinnati. He's played 62% of the snaps, 72% rushing share, and 100% of the red zone snaps. So I think it's his backfield moving forward. So he's a start for me. Which means Zach Moss, RB32 in fantasy points per game this year. He is not. He's a sit for me. Jamar Chase, don't need to go through everything he's done. He's absolutely balling over the last 4 games, so he's a start for me. T. Higgins is fully healthy. He's a start for me. He's looked really, really good. Wide receiver 15 since week 3 and wide receiver 9 over the last 3 games, 18.7 PPR points per game. And then I'm out on Mike Gesicki and Eric All. Since T. Higgins has come back in the lineup and they have been healthier, neither one of those guys are seeing enough volume or scoring enough fantasy points to be relevant to put in my lineup.
Let's move on. Cleveland start and sit. Cleveland's offense, 30th in scoring, 28th in rushing yards, 30th in passing yards. Cincinnati's defense, 25th in points allowed, 27th in rushing yards allowed, 14th in passing yards allowed. Start and sit for Cleveland. I don't think you're starting anybody, but if you do start someone this week, it would be Nick Chubb. You've got no Jerome Ford. I realize Nick Chubb is coming off a gruesome injury, hasn't done anything in the last almost 17, 18 games, but I still think in that offense, he's the only guy worth playing this week. Are you playing? I could take that back. Let's add one more.
I was going to ask you.
David Njoku, I would start. Cincinnati has allowed the 5th most fantasy points to tight ends. So David Njoku is definitely a start. And if you're starting Nick Chubb, I'm okay with it.
So Jerry Jeudy, just not enough there from a wide receiver standpoint. I mean, I know the off-target throws to Cooper. I mean, Deshaun Watson, it's we know the metrics are really, really bad in terms of targeting wide receivers. Is that kind of the fear there for you too?
Especially going against Cincinnati, who has an awful defense. You would expect to see more, but I am of the opinion that we didn't see much out of him in Denver. We didn't see much out of him with Amari Cooper. I mean, I don't expect to see much improvement with no Amari Cooper. It's certainly not going to risk it starting him this week with what we've seen out of Deshaun Watson. So if that changes, great. I'll look forward to possibly playing Jeudy in the future, but not until I see it.
Well said. I'm okay with if he scores points on my bench, I'm okay with it. The smart play is not to put him in your lineup. So I'm right there with you.
Let's move on to another one. That's Philadelphia Eagles 3-2 at the New York Giants 2-4. My pick, I got an upset today, Coach. I got the Giants winning 27-21. What says you, Coach?
Yeah, I got Eagles 31, Giants 21, but I'm going to tell you, I love your pick more than mine. I would love nothing more as a Cowboys fan to see the Eagles go down to the Giants. So they're playing well defensively, so I would not be surprised. We know that the offense in Philly has been tumultuous at times, especially over the last, 12, 13 regular season games. So I've got, as far as starts and sits go, Philly offense has not scored more than 21 points in a game since week 1. So not real excited about what they're doing, but Jalen Hurts is QB8 on the season. He's QB3 this week. He has scored 16 or more fantasy points in every game this season. He's finished as a top 10 quarterback in 3 games. So even though the offense has not looked great, the Giants do give up the 3rd most rushing yards to quarterbacks, and that includes Geno Smith and Joe Burrow, who torched them for 127 yards combined on the ground. So there you go. I'm starting Jalen Hurts. Saquon Barkley, he's RB3 in fantasy points per game. We talk about revenge games. I don't know the players buy into that as much as the fans want them to. I think it's another game for most of these guys, but I think the opportunity to go into Giant Stadium and play well, I think Philly's going to make sure he's getting his touches. But he was the RB1 after 3 games, averaged 134.6 scrimmage yards per game, and had 5 total touchdowns. Over the last 2 games, he's RB21 and RB33 and failed to score. I trust the volume, and I trust Saquon Barkley this week, so he's in my lineup. A.J. Brown, wide receiver 1 in fantasy points per game. I get he's only played 2 games, but in those 2 games, he's been wide receiver 7 and wide receiver 3. So A.J. Brown is absolutely in my lineups. Devontae Smith, wide receiver 11, fantasy points per game, has played in only 4 games. He's missed games 2. He scored 14.9 points or more in every game he's played in, 16.6 a game. He's had 8 or more targets, 7 grabs, and over 75 yards receiving in 3 out of 4 games. I think that offense with both those guys healthy is much better. So I think Devontae Smith is a play this week. And then Dallas Goedert, he's out with a hamstring. That's Grant Calcaterra. There's been a lot of talk about him in terms of what he did coming into the game last week. But look, through the first 4 games, he had a total of 4 grabs for 56 yards and just a 7% target share. I get it. He played 92% of the snaps, 89% route share, 17% target share last week, finishing with 4 grabs for 67 yards within this tight end landscape was good enough to finish his tight end 12. But the Giants give up the 5th fewest fantasy points to tight ends and have also allowed only 4 catches in 5 out of 6 games. So you should have a better options. So he's a dart throw. You want to play him. I'm hoping you've got better options. I think it's the Devontae Smith, Saquon Barkley, A.J. Brown show. So I'm not comfortable putting him in my lineups, but I get it in deeper formats if somebody needed to, but I'm not putting him in mine.
There we go. Let's move on to the other side of the ball. New York Giants start and sit. New York Giants offense, 29th in scoring, 24th in rushing yards, 18th in passing yards. Philadelphia defense, 14th in points allowed, 16th in rushing yards allowed, 21st in passing yards allowed. Quarterback 19 on the week, Daniel Jones. That means he's a super flex start. I'm not starting him in 1 quarterback leagues. Running back 27 on the week, Tyrone Tracy. I got him as a flex start. I know he's back sharing time with Singletary, but I think his volume is going to be much more than it was prior to Singletary being hurt. So I like him this week. And Devin Singletary, I should say. I also have him as another flex start. He's averaging 16.5 touches, 73 yards a game. That workload shall decrease this week, though, with Tracy playing well in his absence. And then the only must start, the only guy I'm starting for sure out of this team is Malik Neighbors. Missed 2 games, but prior to that, top 5 wide receiver on the season, so he's a must start. Wan'Dale Robinson, I would play him at a flex spot, wide receiver 29 in fantasy points per game. I think you can just expect the touchdowns to kind of slip away with Neighbors being back in. And then I'm sitting Slayton. I'm sitting Theo Johnson as well. Anything you would change in that one, Coach?
No, I think you hit it with Slayton. Hey, it was great to see him with Neighbors out. He got to kind of play that Malik Neighbors role in the offense, but now with Neighbors and Wan'Dale Robinson back in the mix, he's out for me. I do think Tyrone Tracy's the guy there, but I understand not wanting and the hesitancy to play him and put him in your lineup.
Let's get to a couple of these questions. Todd, thank you once again for tuning in. Devontae Adams, worth starting today. I know in the only team that I have him, I'm not hesitating. I'm putting in. I think the system is going to be obviously similar, if not the same, with Aaron Rodgers back there. And I think the workload is going to be pretty good with them already having that relationship. So I feel comfortable playing him. Do you, Coach?
Yeah, this is the opposite. I can't remember the player we were talking about earlier, or Jerry Jeudy. If he scores points on my bench, it's still the right decision. I'm not putting Devontae Adams on my bench and letting him go off. So that's a guy that, based on history, you're playing Devontae Adams even in his first game. Look, they played together for so many years, and we'll get to that breakdown of that game here in a little bit. But that Aaron Rodgers can give him a look, and Devontae Adams knows exactly what he's asking for. And as a guy who's played the receiver position and coached it, you get quarterback and wide receiver on the same page, magic happens. So I can't sit Devontae Adams, even if it's first game in New York.
Okay, let's go to this question. Steve, I believe Brian Robinson or Devontae Smith. We don't know if it's PPR or non-PPR. I think in non-PPR, I'm going Brian, and in PPR, I'm going with Devontae.
Yep, 100%. Just had that in my notes. Just wrote it down. That's exactly the same way I would go.
Let's move on to our next game. Las Vegas Raiders, 2-4 at Los Angeles Rams. I've got the Rams winning 24-14. Who do you like in this one, Coach?
I got Rams 24, Raiders 19.
Okay, Las Vegas's offense. Let's get to their start and sit. They're 27th in scoring, 31st in rushing yards, 17th in passing yards. LA Rams defense, unfortunately, it's one of the worst in the league. 29th in points allowed, 32nd in rushing yards allowed, 18th in passing yards allowed. Who are we starting, if anybody, for Las Vegas?
Well, I can tell you the only person that I am comfortable even starting, and this is a stretch, is going to be Brock Bowers, not a stretch. I'm sorry, Brock Bowers, which is not surprising, should not be a stretch. He's a tight end 2 in fantasy points per game behind only George Kittle on the year. He's had 3 top 5 fantasy finishes this season. And over the last 2 games, he's been targeted 22 times with 17 grabs, 168 yards on a score. His projections for the year: 105 grabs, 1,088 yards. I mean, he's having a year. So Brock Bowers is the only guy I'm comfortable playing. You could make an argument based on who you have with injuries. You know, Jonathan Taylor is out. There's other backs that are out. You've got bye weeks that Alexander Madison may not be a bad play. But those are the only 2 guys. I'm not starting Aiden O'Connell. I'm definitely out on Zamir White, who's RB 61 in fantasy points per game in his 4 games played. His advanced metrics are absolute garbage, so I'm out on him. Trey Tucker could be a sneaky flex play in deeper leagues. I get it. I mean, outside, if you get DJ Turner, I mean, you get into guys like that after Trey Tucker and Brock Bowers. So there's really not anybody in the passing game that I would trust outside of Brock Bowers. But if you had to play a Trey Tucker, I would get it.
Okay, let's move over to the Los Angeles Rams starting to sit. Their offense, 25th in scoring, 27th in rushing yards, 12th in passing yards. Las Vegas' defense, 27th in points allowed, 23rd in rushing yards allowed, 7th in passing yards allowed. Quarterback 21, Matthew Stafford. He's only a super flex start at best. I don't feel comfortable playing him in 1 quarterback leagues, especially with the news that Cooper Kupp is out. Running back 1 on the week, though, Kyron Williams. He's a must start, so don't even think about it. You're putting him in. And then with no Cooper Kupp, I feel comfortable playing Jordan Whittington in a flex spot. And I would feel okay playing Colby Parkinson at the tight end if you didn't have anybody better. Anything else you would change on that one, Coach, or anything you would change?
Well, what I would say is I wish Cooper Kupp was playing.
Yeah.
You know, I wish we had him this week so you can kind of see what that looks like for Matthew Stafford. I'm forced to play Stafford in like Scott Fishbowl because I don't trust starting Russell Wilson or Justin Fields. We don't know if that's going to be a situation where they have packages for Fields or what that's going to look like. So I've actually got Raheem Blackshear just because of return yards as my super flex guy. So
I wish I was playing you this week, Coach.
Yeah, I wish you were too. I don't wish you were. It's not a good matchup for me after going 4-0 the last 2 weeks. I need one this week.
All right, hey, let's move to our next game. Carolina Panthers 1-5 at the Washington Commanders 4-2. Washington, I got them winning 35-14. Who do you have in this one, Coach?
I got Commanders 33, Panthers 24, and it's only that close because I think the Panthers get a late touchdown. We know the Commanders, in terms of against the pass, have not played well this year. So I do have Carolina at least getting some points this week.
Carolina offense, 28th in scoring, 23rd in rushing yards, 23rd in passing yards. Washington defense, 22nd in points allowed, 21st in rushing yards allowed, 19th in passing yards allowed. Who are we starting, if anybody, for Carolina?
So I've got Andy Dalton. I've got him as in super flex formats. I don't mind him as a start. He's the QB 19 since being inserted in the lineup in week 3. He scored 16 or more fantasy points and finished as a QB 2 in 3 or 4 starts. And it's a good matchup. Commanders allow the second most touchdown passes and third most fantasy points to quarterbacks. So I'm okay starting Andy Dalton if you have to. And then Chuba Hubbard, RB5 in fantasy points per game in PPR formats. He's the RB2 over the last 4 games with 20.7 PPR points per game. He's had 92 or more yards rushing in each of the last 4 games. He's getting 5.1 yards per carry. Commanders give up 5.2 yards per carry. And then PPR, he's at least 4 grabs in the last 5 games. So he's an absolute smash start for me with Chuba Hubbard because it doesn't matter what the script is. Negative game script, positive game script, neutral, he's seeing volume. Then Deontay Johnson, he's battling some injuries. He's got the ribs, he's got the ankle, he's got the hamstrings. But according to Ian Rappaport this morning before we went live, he was playing. So assuming he is playing, since Andy Dalton became the starter in week 3, he's finished with at least 19.8 points in 3 out of 4 games and is the wide receiver 10 in PPR scoring. And the Commanders give up the 5th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. So Deontay Johnson is a start. And then after that, I'm not starting anybody. I'm not starting Xavier Leggett. I'm not starting Jatavion Sanders.
Okay, let's move on to the Washington start and sit. Washington's offense, 2nd in scoring, 5th in rushing yards, 13th in passing yards. Carolina defense, 32nd in points allowed, 30th in rushing yards, 23rd in passing yards allowed. Quarterback 2 on the week, Jaden Daniels, obvious must start. Wide receiver 11 on the week, Terry McLaurin, must start from here. We always wanted him to have a quarterback. He's got one. We're now seeing the type of production we expected from him. And then Zach Ertz, he's the only other guy that I would think about starting. other than, well, we'll get into Brian Robinson as well. But he leads Washington in red zone targets for Zach Ertz, so I feel good about starting him. Brian Robinson, he is expected to play. He's averaging 18.5 touches and 93.8 yards a game, so he's a start. So here we go again. Daniels start, Robinson start, McLaurin start, Zach Ertz start. You change anything with that, Coach?
Nope. Those are the only guys I would start as well.
Okay, here we go. Let's get to Hoop Central. Do I start Amari Cooper? We talked about starting Adams, but not start Cooper. For me, that's what I would do. I would start Adams. I'm not starting Cooper. You got one guy who's going into a system he knows and who's familiar with the quarterback, and then you got Cooper, totally opposite. So I don't feel comfortable starting him. Obviously, if you don't have great options, then he's got to be played, but I prefer not to.
Yeah, it's not like we've seen a lot of success in Buffalo's passing game to begin with. I mean, Khalil Shakir has been the lead dog, but he's not giving you a ton of yardage and touchdowns. He's just giving you volume. So I don't trust starting Amari Cooper this week either. I want to see what that offense is going to look like first.
Okay, moving on. Kansas City Chiefs 5-0 at the San Francisco 49ers 3-3. I like how you put this in your notes, but that Andy Reid is 21-4 coming off a bye week. So I've got Kansas City winning this one, 17-14. Who do you have winning this one, Coach?
I've got the upset. San Francisco 24, Chiefs 20. At some point, they've got to lose. It's in San Francisco. And when I saw the stat 21-4, I'm like, sounds like he's due. So I've got San Francisco winning this one.
All right, let's get to the Kansas City starting sits. Kansas City's offense, 15th in scoring, 5th in rushing yards, 9th in passing yards. San Francisco's defense, 12th in points allowed, 7th in rushing yards allowed, 17th in passing yards allowed. Who are we starting for Kansas City?
Patrick Mahomes, QB 20 on the season. It's been a very ordinary ride this season for Patrick Mahomes in terms of fantasy. He's scored 14 or more points in every game, but does not have a single one over 17.5. He's now become the definition of a safe floor play as opposed to a high ceiling play. He had his first 300-yard game of the season last week and somehow did not throw a touchdown. He's thrown at least one interception every game, has 6 touchdowns to 6 interceptions this year. If his name was not Patrick Mahomes, is he in the lineup? Probably not. So he's not a must-start for me in one quarterback leagues. Obviously, in super flex leagues, you trust the talent. I could certainly get it. But if his name wasn't Patrick Mahomes, he wasn't playing in Andy Reid's system, you're probably not super excited about putting him in your lineup. But then Kareem Hunt, RB5 in his first start before the bye week. He finished with 27 carries for 102 yards and a touchdown in his first start. He handled 63% of the snaps and 75% of the rushing attempts. He's a start for me. Niners are only giving up 3.9 yards per carry, but give the 5th most receptions to running backs this season. I'm okay starting him as your RB2 or flex play. And then, other than that, I'm out. I mean, Juju Smith-Schuster, questionable with the hamstring. If he does play, he's wide receiver 33 this week. He's a low-end wide receiver 3 flex play if you had to put him in your lineups. And the 49ers have given up the 9th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers this season. So I get it. In deeper leagues, we need to play Juju Smith-Schuster. Xavier Worthy, wide receiver 38 in fantasy points per game. If you take away his week 1 performance where he got 2 touchdowns, he's averaging just 9.3 PPR points per game. I'll continue to say it every week. He does not get the volume to get you excited about playing him. I get that he's got the 4 touchdowns, but it's on very limited volume. So I don't trust putting Xavier Worthy in my lineup. And Travis Kelce, he's wide receiver 13 on the season. If you'd asked me this a few weeks ago, it was much worse than that. So he's now the tight end 1 going this week. He's a tight end 3 over the last 2 games at 16 fantasy points per game without Rashee Rice. So I'm okay playing Travis Kelce. He's back in the tight end 1 conversation.
Let's move over to the other side of the ball. San Francisco's offense, 7th in scoring, 3rd in rushing yards, 2nd in passing yards. KC defense, 6th in points allowed, 5th in rushing yards allowed, 20th in passing yards allowed. Quarterback 9 on the week, Brock Purdy. He's a start for me. He's quarterback 12 in fantasy points per game. Jordan Mason, running back 15 on the week. He's a must start, but he's not as must as he was before. Facing a San Francisco defense that is 3rd in rushing yards allowed. And Jordan did get a little banged up last week with the shoulder. But you're playing him if you got him. Other must start, Deebo Samuel, definite must start for me. Brandon Ayuk, I'm starting him, but he could struggle against the KC secondary. And then George Kittle, tight end 2 for the week. He's a must start. Moving on, New York Jets 2-4 at the Pittsburgh Steelers 4-2. I like the Jets winning on the road. I've got the Jets winning 17, Steelers 14. Who do you have in this one, Coach?
Yeah, I've got Jets 23, Steelers 21.
New York's starting sits. You've got New York's offense 23rd in scoring, 30th in rushing yards, and 16th in passing yards. Pittsburgh's defense, one of the best in the league, 2nd in points allowed, 4th in rushing yards, 13th in passing yards allowed. Who are we starting for the Jets?
Yeah, so let's talk Aaron Rodgers, QB 22 in fantasy points per game. He scored more than 14.8 fantasy points in 4 of the last 5 games. He's one of the most accurate quarterbacks in NFL history, but he's got more games under 60% completion rate versus over a 70% completion rate. He's had 4 games under 250 yards passing, and 2 of those games were under 200 yards. So even with Davante Adams in the mix and the confidence I have in starting Aaron Rodgers against a defense that allows the 11th fewest passing touchdowns, 8th lowest pass rate, and 9th lowest completion rate over expected. So they also give up the 4th fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. So in Superflex, you can consider playing him, but he's not in my lineups in 1 quarterback leagues. I want to see what this offense is going to look like with Davante Adams and Garrett Wilson, how they're going to utilize the running game with Breece Hall in combination with that. So tougher matchup. He's not a must start for me. Breece Hall, RB22 in fantasy points per game this year. He's the RB7 this week, and what a difference removing Nathaniel Hackett from play calling has made. With Todd Downing calling plays last week, we saw the volume come back. Hall finished last week as the RB8, 18 carries for 113 yards and 5 grabs for 56 yards through the air. Season highs in rush attempts, rushing yards, and receiving yards last week. So even though the Pittsburgh defense is 4th in rushing yards allowed and 2nd rushing touchdowns per game, it's not a great matchup on paper. They do give up the 3rd most receptions to running backs. Breece Hall is very active in the passing game for the Jets. So I do like Breece Hall. I'm out on Braylon Allen. Numbers have not been there over the last couple of games with just a 23% snap share. So I'm out. Davante Adams, we talked about earlier, you've got to put him in your line if he's healthy. It's magical. All of a sudden the hamstring is perfect. He's all of a sudden he's healthy. He's arrived in New York and he's ready to go. He's a play. Garrett Wilson, just based on the volume alone, we don't know what it's going to look like, but I still think they're going to pepper him with some targets. He is wide receiver 24 in fantasy points per game. He's had 0 double-digit PPR games over the first 4 games. Over the last 2, he's scored 16.1 and 16.7. I'm still confident in him as a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 flex play this week. Alan Lazard is the one guy that I'm out on now. I think it's Garrett Wilson and it's Davante Adams in the passing game. I think Alan Lazard can be your security blanket, guy you can look for in the red zone with confidence. But Davante Adams, you look at the touchdowns he's had with Aaron Rodgers, the amount of years he's been 10-plus touchdowns. Davante Adams is your goal line guy. And Tyler Conklin, there's just not enough targets to go around. I think he's had games this week where he's played well. He's tied in 21 on the season, but he's had 4 games under 6 fantasy points and under 20 receiving yards this season. So he's an absolute sit for me.
Let's move on to the other side of the ball. Pittsburgh starting sit. Pittsburgh's offense, 21st in scoring, 9th in rushing yards, 28th in passing yards. New York Jets defense, 7th in points allowed, 17th in rushing yards allowed, 2nd in passing yards allowed. Let's move on. Let's go talk about their quarterbacks. Russell Wilson and Justin Fields talked this week that both could play, which makes them both a sit for me.
Yep.
The only guy that I'm really comfortable starting is Najee Harris. He's facing a Jets defense that's allowed the 7th highest missed tackle rate, the 9th highest success rushing rate, and the 9th highest yards per or after contact per attempt. So Najee Harris is a start. Jaylen Warren, we have not seen what the Jaylen Warren we saw much of last year, so he's a sit. George Pickens, wide receiver 47 on the year in fantasy points per game. He's a sit, especially until you kind of think with Russell Wilson, we could see an uptick and maybe more explosive plays for George Pickens. But again, we've said this before and we'll say it again, and that is kind of a wait and see approach. I want to see what we see before I do anything with him. Tight end 16, Pat Freiermuth. He's tight end 10 on the season. He's a start for me. You talk about tight ends being security blankets. Russell Wilson loves tight ends, so I feel comfortable playing Pat Freiermuth. Anything you would change there, Coach?
Nope. I'm right there with you. I'm out on George Pickens, so I'm right there with you.
Let's talk about this TJ question.
Yep.
We've got Deontay Johnson or Jordan Mason. Deontay Johnson, a little bit banged up, playing Washington. Jordan Mason, a little bit banged up, playing a great rushing defense in Kansas City. Who would you pick? It is PPR. Who would you pick in that?
It's funny. If it's PPR, you're going Deontay Johnson. If it's standard, you're going Jordan Mason. If it's half PPR, it's pretty much a split, right? I just trust the volume. I think I said it earlier. We broke down the Carolina Panthers game. I think Andy Dalton plays well this week. I mean, he's played well in 3 out of the 4 games they played. So I think there's a little bit more passing volume there. If anything, it's going to be a late game script. It's going to call for more passing. So I trust Deontay Johnson more than Jordan Mason. To me, he's got to score a touchdown, which he could do, certainly, but he's banged up. So I lean Deontay Johnson and half PPR.
Let's move on to our next game. Baltimore Ravens 4-2 at Tampa Bay Buccaneers 4-2. My pick. I got the Ravens winning 31, Buccaneers 27. How about you, Coach?
Yeah, I got Buccaneers 24, Ravens 23.
And then we've got the Baltimore's start and sit. Baltimore's offense, 4th in scoring, 1st in rushing yards, 8th in passing yards. Tampa Bay defense, 19th in points allowed, 12th in rushing yards allowed, 29th in passing yards allowed. Who are we starting for Baltimore?
Yeah, so Lamar Jackson, he's the QB1 on the season. He's averaging 24.2 fantasy points per game. He's finished with more than 19 fantasy points in 5 out of 6 games and scored more than 25 in 3 of those. He's thrown for more than 300 yards in back-to-back games and has 7 touchdown passes over the last 3. He's averaging 67 yards rushing and 255 yards passing and 2 touchdowns per game. He's an absolute start. He's on an MVP trajectory again. They continue to win out. And then Derrick Henry, RB3. He's RB1 in standard scoring and even RB2 in PPR scoring just because he's getting so much volume and finding the end zone. He scored more than 25 PPR points in 3 out of 6 games, has never scored less than 10.6, which is back in week 1. He's got 9 total touchdowns over the last 4 games. He's ran for 574 yards and 7 touchdowns. He's an absolute smash start. Justice Hill, I'm out on. He's had just 6 carries for 19 yards and 2 grabs for 10 yards total over the last 2 games. As long as Derrick Henry is healthy and they're in a positive game script, which they've been in more often than not, I just don't see enough touches for Justice Hill. Zay Flowers is wide receiver 27 on the season, but he's wide receiver 6 over the last 2 games. Lamar Jackson and Zay Flowers are finding a rhythm. He's got 16 grabs for 243 yards over the last 2 games. He's a clear wide receiver 1 in this offense, so he should be in your lineups. He's getting a 26% snap share and a 32% first read share, and he ranks 7th in separation rate. He's finding route side space, so I like Zay Flowers this week. I'm out on Rashad Bateman and Nelson Aguilar. Not enough volume there. And I think the interesting conversation is tight ends, right? Like we talk about this every week with them. Is it Charlie Kolar? Is it Mark Andrews? Is it Isaiah Likely week? And right now, Mark Andrews is tight end 23 on the season. He's tight end 15 this week. He had his first double-digit game last week, finishing with 3 grabs for 66 yards and scored his first touchdown of the season. He's had back-to-back games with at least 3 grabs and 55 yards. If I'm going to start a tight end in this offense, it's going to be Mark Andrews. If you look at the last games recently, yes, on the season, Isaiah Likely is tight end 9. But if you take away the first game when he had 26 fantasy points, he's a tight end 24, so he's below Mark Andrews. So for me, Mark Andrews is the play in that tight end room this week if you're going to play one.
Let's go to the other side of the ball because we got a few questions to get to after we're done with this game. We got Tampa Bay start sit. Tampa Bay's offense, 2nd in points scored, 8th in rushing yards, 11th in passing yards. Baltimore's defense, 23rd in points allowed, 1st in rushing yards allowed, 31st in passing yards allowed. So you look at that defense, struggle against pass, great against the run. So essentially I'm starting all the people involved in the passing game for Tampa Bay and sitting everybody who's involved in the rushing game. So quarterback 8 on the week, Baker Mayfield, he's a must start. Rashad White, Bucky Irving, Sean Tucker. They talked about it this week. They're going to go with a hot hand. I don't know if there is going to be a hot hand this week, so I'm sitting all 3 of them. Wide receiver 6 on the week, Chris Godwin, must start. Wide receiver 14 on the week, Mike Evans, must start. Tight end 13, Cade Otton, he's a start. Baltimore has allowed the most receiving yards per game to tight end. So let's get to some questions, but that's everything on that team. Would you change anything with any of those Tampa Bay guys?
No, I think it's just crazy in the running back room. I got a lot of shares of Bucky Irving, and of course Sean Tucker comes in and blows up last week, which puts that whole backfield in chaos. So I hate it, but that's the game we play, man.
Here we go. We've got Jake. Jake, thank you so much for tuning in. And you're right. It's always great to be around the great knowledge of Coach Bobby Bruce. Let's move to Nikel. We got Jordan Mason, Tank Dell, Chase Brown. Choose two. Choose two. For me, it would be Dell and Brown.
Yeah, it's Dell and Brown for me too. We talked about Jordan Mason being a little bit banged up, and they just added a running back. I don't know why I can't remember his name now, but San Francisco added a running back too. So that tells you there's probably a little more banged up than people think they are. So I'm with you.
All right, looking for thoughts for running back 2 and flex spots. Full PPR. He needs 1 running back and then 2 flex spots. So for me, I'm going with, let's look at running backs real quick. What do you got there in front of you, Coach?
Well, I like Josh Downs. We talked about that this week. We like Najee Harris. I don't like McConkey. I don't like Pickens. We can eliminate those guys. We like Chase Brown and we like Josh Jacobs. So to me, it's between those 4 guys. You got to pick you guys who's out. So Josh Jacobs, Chase Brown, Josh Downs, and Najee Harris. Of those 4, who's out?
God, that's pretty good. Not a bad choice to go with. I'm keeping Jacobs, and I think in that group, I'm keeping Harris.
Yeah. So then you got, so now it's between what? Chase Brown and Josh Downs for who you're sitting, right? Because he needs 2 flex plays and an RB2.
So I would go Brown over Downs.
Yep. There you go.
Okay, let's move on to our next one. We've got A-Chain, Chase Brown, Debo, Jordan needs to start 2. So Debo is the most definite start. And then I feel comfortable about starting. I'm going Debo and A-Chain for me. What about you?
Yeah, I was going to wonder where you're going to go there because we both like Chase Brown this week, but I think you have to go with the explosiveness that A-Chan brings. So if I'm going for upside, I'm going Debo and A-Chan as well.
Flex option, full PPR, Debo, A-Chain, Cook, Cooper, Jacobs.
Looking for a flex option, full PPR. So pick one of these guys to play in your flex. This is a great place to be, and I'd love to see what the rest of that lineup looks like. But
yeah.
So Debo, we like A-Chan, James, assuming that's James Cook. You've got Cooper. We're out on Cooper. We know that. And Jacobs, man, if I'm going there, I'm going Debo.
I agree with that.
Safest play in that group.
Debo. There we go. Let's get to, we got one more game left, Coach, or how many we got left here? Is this the Monday night game right now? I believe it is.
Yep, Chargers, Cardinals.
Okay, let's go. Los Angeles Chargers 3-2 at the Arizona Cardinals 2-4. I like Arizona bouncing back after the loss to Green Bay. I got Arizona winning 24-17. How do you have this one?
Man, the Cardinals have been in every game, and they've lost some tough ones. I just think the Chargers, what they can do in the run game, the identity that they have created, and how they're going to play football, they just don't make a lot of mistakes. They protect the football. They use up the clock. I've got Chargers 27, Cardinals 23.
Los Angeles Chargers offense, 26th in scoring, 10th in rushing yards, 29th in passing yards. Arizona's defense, 27th in points allowed, 29th in rushing yards allowed, 22nd in passing yards allowed. Give us your start and sits for the Chargers.
Yeah, so let's talk Justin Herbert. He's QB 24 this week in the consensus rankings, but we've got him he's QB 31 in the season. He has scored between 9 and 13.7 fantasy points in every game. That's not good. That's gross. That's not what you're looking for in a guy that has the arm talent Justin Herbert does. This is what we knew was going to happen with Jim Harbaugh. I don't know that we knew it was going to happen to this degree, but he's only attempted more than 30 passes and thrown for more than 200 yards in one game this season. He did both of those last week. He's thrown a touchdown in every game, but only has one game with multiple touchdowns. He's got 6 touchdowns on the year to 1 interception. The Cardinals give up the 11th most passing yards, 7th most passing touchdowns, and the 4th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. It's a great matchup, but all indicators tell me that the Chargers are going to start throwing the ball all over the field. I don't see it, so I'm not starting Justin Herbert this week. I am starting J.K. Dobbins. He's the RB15 even in fantasy points per game on the season. We have him as the RB10 this week. He scored 18 or more points in 3 out of 5 games. He was the RB4 after the first 2 games. Kind of came down, RB38 in the 2 games after that, and then bounced back last week as RB13 with season high, career high 27 touches last week. He's averaging 23 touches, 97.6 total yards per game. So for me, he's still in my lineup every week. Kamani Vidal, was great to see him get some action last week. Did have the long touchdown reception. I'm really looking forward to seeing what this backfield is going to look like. I've liked him coming out. I'd like to see him get more touches, but not there yet, so he's not in my lineups. Ladd McConkey, he's been battling a hip injury all week. Over the last 2 games, he's been targeted 15 times, has 9 grabs, 110 yards, and a touchdown. but he's averaging just 3.8 receptions and 43.8 yards per game with only 2 touchdowns on the season. So if he suits up, he's the best option you have as a pass catcher in this offense. He's the only one that I would trust at all, and only in PPR formats. Standard, half PPR, I'm probably out on this entire wide receiver room and tight end room. There is a chance for Will Dissly. Hayden Hurst has been out with a groin injury, so Will Dissly gets an opportunity to be the guy this week. He has been battling a shoulder injury. I don't trust it enough, so I'm not starting Will Dissly this week.
Let's move on to the other side of the ball. Arizona starting sits. Their offense, 17th in scoring, 7th in rushing yards, 22nd in passing yards. Los Angeles Chargers defense, 1st in points allowed, 6th in rushing yards allowed, 8th in passing yards allowed. Quarterback 13 on the week, Kyler Murray. He's quarterback 13 on the season, and he has a quarterback 1 and quarterback 5 finish on a week this season. So he's kind of a volatile play. You don't exactly know what you get, but I feel comfortable playing him this week. Running back 21, James Conner. He's a must start for me. Marvin Harrison. He's cleared to play. He's a start, but this isn't a great matchup against that Chargers defense.
Yep.
And then the only other guy we're talking about starting, that's Trey McBride. He's a must start. Anything you would change with that, Coach?
No, I'm right there with you.
Okay, let's get to a couple more questions. We've got who do you like, Ingram or Kincaid the rest of the year?
Hope I made the right decision. Who should I keep for the rest of the season? I like Evan Ingram. I mean, the volume that they're giving, I don't know what's happened in this game because we've been live this whole time outside of the first quarter. I haven't seen any of it. We've been prepping for the show, so I don't know what Evan Ingram has done. But I do trust the fact that Jacksonville is going to be in negative game scripts quite a bit this year, which I think helps Evan Ingram. He's coming off a career year last year. And now you just added Amari Cooper in Buffalo. You had another target and pass catcher. So what say you? You with me on that one? Or
I'm with you on that because you know he led the league in targets last year for tight ends. You saw, and we weren't watching, but I had the game in the background, and their offense looked a little bit better today. So hopefully that'll continue going forward. Jonas, he's greeting us from Germany. Veskrosafane. Thank you, Jonas, for tuning in. Start 2, Najee, Watson, Bucky Irvin, or Winnington. Najee's definitely one. I think he's talking Christian Watson or Winnington. I think in this matchup against, I'm going with Christian Watson over Winnington and Irving.
Yeah, I'll go Christian Watson and Najee. I think they give you the highest upside. I think Whittington, you could argue maybe a safer floor, but I would still chase the points with Watson.
Chargers defense or Colts defense? I'm going with the Chargers versus Arizona. If you look at the Chargers defense, they're one of the top in all the major categories. So Chargers for me. And then Blake wanted to tell you he will be at the Charger game today.
Nice, man. Go get it. Bolt up, man. That's awesome, Blake.
Appreciate everyone who's tuned in. We will not have a show this Wednesday. We expect to be back next Wednesday. I may be doing it right next to you, Coach, in your office or in your kitchen like we did last time.
That's right, man. Looking forward to it.
Hey, let's get one more question in here before we leave. Bucky Irvin or Tyler Lockett? Who do you like in this one? We've already talked about a tough matchup for Tampa Bay versus Baltimore. But Lockett, those are tough ones.
They're both tough. You got Bucky Irving now, which you could argue if Rashad White does play this week, that you've got a 3-headed monster. I still think Bucky Irving is the most talented guy in that room. They're going to feed the hot hand. Are you willing to bank on that Bucky Irving is a hot hand this week? Tyler Lockett, to me, has a role that's been defined. He's a wide receiver 2 in that offense. He's or 3, depending on the week, between JSN and him. Lockett, to me, is a safer floor. So I'd probably put Tyler Lockett in my lineup.
Okay, let's go to Lavi. Lavi says start 1 running back and 1 flex. Running back I'm going to start here will be Hunt. And in the flex spot, I would feel most comfortable starting Downs. How about you, Coach?
Yeah, it's not even hesitation. I think it's Kareem Hunt and Josh Downs.
Okay, that looks like we got to them all. Thank you so much. Let's go get our own lineup set, Coach. Hope you have a great day. And again, congrats on the no bad news today on the Cowboys.
That's it, man. Hey, I appreciate all you guys for tuning in and all the questions. You can find us on Twitter at Coach Bruce122 and at Brett L. Pape. If you have any other questions, let us know how your teams do.
Have a great day, everybody.